Hi there, I'm Michelle Singh, and I want to welcome you to the Restful Teacher Challenge. Now, I created this challenge because I have been on the other side of burnout. I have been on the other side of dread. I have been on the other side of drained, okay? And I know what it feels like to be completely overwhelmed and stressed. I know that feeling of being pulled in thousands of different directions. And I know what it feels like when everything is all too much and my brain and physical body and spiritual being is at capacity. So I hope that you're able to gain practical insights from our guest speakers and fellow educators and professionals who will be sharing with you on this challenge. So thank you for joining the challenge, and let's meet our special guest speaker for today. Dr. Siobhan, welcome to the Restful Teacher Challenge. Would you please share a bit about who you are and the important work you do in this world, personally and professionally?
Sure. Well, I loved your introduction because the first thing I thought of is rest is always relevant. It's always something important to talk about. So I love that you are just centering this specific topic. And it is in alignment with the work that I do professionally, which also, again, kind of bleeds over into my personal life. And so I started out in the field of education, taught seventh grade English for a number of years, then transitioned into becoming a high school counselor, eventually the lead high school counselor in that department. And something clicked for me in terms of the whole mental health and wellness space. I really wanted to focus just specifically on that. School counselors wear a lot of hats. And so it was at that point that I decided to transition in terms of going all in terms of the mental health. And so I went back to school, became licensed. I still hold my school counselor certification, but also now I'm licensed to practice mental health therapy. So I do have my own private practice. I'm based out of Dallas, Texas. I'm virtual, so I'm able to see clients all over the state. And so obviously this whole idea of like mental health, emotional wellness, rest comes up a lot in my work with clients. And even when I was working in the schools, obviously my focus was on students, but I also definitely saw the need of teachers, educators, administrators, everyone needing to be able to prioritize their rest and oftentimes not being able to do so. A lot of times because of factors beyond their control. But again, I just wanted to be able to set myself up professionally where I could pour into educators and allow them the opportunity to be able to prioritize rest in their lives in a way that, I both know they don't always get to do.
Well, that's definitely a fact, right? We often, if not all the time, as educators, as mothers, as caregivers, we put everybody else first. Right. And we pour from an empty cup. But the reality is that we need to replenish ourselves so that we can be better for those that we serve, whether it's our students in our classrooms or our own children or the family members that we are responsible for in our lives. So I love that you talked about prioritizing rest, because rest and just your well-being, it's not something that you should put on the back burner. It really is something that you should prioritize, just like you prioritize taking care of your kids, students and children. You should prioritize well-being. So can you tell us a bit about your journey and how you came to prioritize rest for yourself, but also how you encourage educators? You and me, we know it because we've been in the trenches. I'm a language arts teacher too, so I know what it's like to bring home that cart of papers and projects to grade, right? And so how do you prioritize rest for yourself as an educator, former educator, and how do you help your educator clients to do the same?
Yeah, so I just look back to my time, especially being in the classroom, one of the most rewarding jobs, but also one of the hardest in terms of managing energy levels. I think it was at that point that I could kind of recall my first experience with being burnt out, but not really having the language to even know what it was that I was experiencing, kind of being in survival mode, as you said, almost kind of the normalization of like lugging home carts of work, even after a more than full work day. And so really looking back in terms of the supports that I could have used back then, the supports that I wish that I had back then. And so thinking about my own journey, of course, led me to what were the things that could have helped me back then that definitely informs the work that I do now. And so I think it really, support obviously is a big factor in all of this, looking back in terms of, it would have been nice to kind of get that heads up in terms of even during like new teacher training or orientation, we learn all of the ins and outs about the professional piece of it, but not so much about the impact on ourselves, like our bodies, our personal life when the work kind of spills over. And I think we have to be careful because there were times where I almost blamed myself because I thought, well, what am I doing wrong? Like, I'm not feeling like I'm totally cut out for this. Everyone around me seems to be okay. But it was something that wasn't normalized in terms of talking about how we really felt. And I truly feel like you have to be able to name something before you can tame it and control it. And so a lot of it, I was kind of, suffering in silence because I really couldn't specifically name what was going on. I thought maybe I was the only one. And of course, in hindsight, I know for a fact that I wasn't in it alone, but it is just my hope that I can get more teachers, educators in general, to just be more vocal about what they're experiencing and to not have to go through it alone like I did.
So I'm glad that you talked about burnout and you shared your experience of not really knowing what it is and being able to name it, name the feelings, name what it is you're experiencing, because we don't know what we don't know. So can you tell us, like, if you are experiencing this, then that is a sign of burnout, because like you said, you don't know that this is what it is. And then if that's the case, what are some ways that you can rest to help you overcome that, or address it?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you could also touch on common misconceptions, because you talked also about these things are normalized.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're normalized, the misconception or the myth is, oh, it's okay to feel tired. It's okay to wake up feeling tired.
Wow.
That's just normal. That's what happens when you're over 40.
Right. Yes. So I love, again, just the opportunity for me to be able to define it. So a lot of times people talk about stress versus burnout, even like anxiety, and they kind of use all of those words interchangeably, but there are real differences. And so to me, it's this idea, stress is the idea of having like too much on your plate, too much of something, too many tasks, too many responsibilities. So overall, a general feeling of like heaviness, being weighed down too much. When it has crossed over from stress or even chronic stress into burnout, when there is a general feeling of like not having enough to give. So it goes from too much to now I don't have the energy, I don't have the capacity. I'm feeling completely spent in terms of energy, feeling drained, kind of that level of exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
And that can kind of manifest physically, but then also just kind of mentally when it's kind of crossed over in terms of not that you no longer care about your students or your work, but just for survival, for self-preservation, you start not caring as much because this is part of what we have to unlearn, this association that if you care, you're supposed to go above and beyond. You're supposed to overextend yourself and over deliver. And we know that leads to nowhere good, fast, very quickly. And so to keep yourself from like crashing and burning, you begin to kind of take this more negative approach to your work, kind of having a negative outlook on things. If it has affected you in that way mentally, then you're kind of on the brink of burnout if you're not already there. And so, speaking to the misconceptions, as you said, it's this idea we have to overcome a lot of the negative connotations associated with rest. A lot of times, we feel like, oh, if we rest or take time out for ourselves, we're lazy or we don't care as much or, we're being selfish. This whole narrative where it's like rest is really just a reward, which I have, of course, completely changed my thinking around rest. It's really a non-negotiable. It has to be a foundational part of your wellness, including it as much as you prioritize sleep or nutrition or movement. You've got to have that downtime. It's two sides of the same coin. None of us can operate, especially in excellence as educators. We're high achievers, but not to mistake high achieving for overachieving. You can be a high achiever, but still not burn yourself into the ground. You can care about your students and doing a good job, but not at the expense of your mental and emotional health. And so I think it's about redefining what rest is. It's not a reward after the work is done. It's a part of how you refuel and re-energize yourself. And not just for the sake of being able to do more work, but just because we are human beings. We're not robots. We're not, AI running out here, firing at all cylinders all the time. We need to honor our humanity through rest.
Yes, honor our humanity through rest. I love that. Rest is not a luxury. It's absolutely a necessity. We need it to live, to
Yeah.
function, like you said, in excellence, which Many of us who are high achievers, we want to do things in that way, and we can't if we don't rest and take care of ourselves first.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you touched on so many things, but I heard you say, I'm thinking of it in tears.
Okay.
So you have your to-do list that's overextensive, right? Because we all have that really long to-do list, right? And so that's like, okay, I feel stressed because I have too many things on my to-do list. And then it gets to the point where I now can't handle it. I am at my capacity.
Right.
So that's step two. Step three is, oh, I'm in like autopilot mode. I don't have feelings. I'm just doing things to go through the motions. I've
Mm-hmm.
completely disconnected. And that's when you get into burnout mode.
That
Like, so
survival
that's how
mode energy.
survival mode. So that's like how I'm seeing the different levels of how you go from just stress to burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
how can you help teachers? Like, what advice would you give teachers or educators who feel stressed, who feel they're at their capacity, who feel they're in autopilot, and
Mm-hmm.
they are still struggling to find that time to incorporate rest in their daily routines,
Yeah.
but also rekindle that joy?
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is like the $1 million question, right? So I do think there is a balance in terms of recognizing what is on the individual person to take kind of responsibility for, thinking about what's within your control to change, versus especially in education, looking at education as an institution, thinking about, okay, what part of this is actually systemic in nature? Because what we don't want to do is to make it seem like it's your fault, like you're the reason why you have kind of crossed over into no man's land where it's just you're completely, beyond burnout. And so really taking into account, okay, what's within my control, what's not, what is a reasonable amount of stress to experience, given just the reality of being an educator, especially during these times. And once you've actually kind of honored that part of you that can say, you know what, this is actually not all my fault, what part can I take in terms of getting back my sense of power and control? And so I think that acknowledgement piece, again, honoring your humanity is the first step. And then it's about, okay, how can I either prioritize? I feel like there's so many truths that we have to accept. So, for example, it's this idea there will always be something that needs to be done, right? I mean, again, reality of the work, the nature of what it means to be an educator. So, if there's always something that kind of needs to be done, you almost have to get comfortable with the idea that there's really no such thing as like getting caught up, let alone like ahead, because there will always be something, outstanding. And so, at the end of the day, you have to be the line in the sand that says, okay, you know what? I'm done up to this point. Even if there's still things kind of hanging out there, you have to learn how to be okay with that. And so that comes down to prioritizing what's most important, what is kind of a sense of urgency. I think sometimes it means really getting with your administrator to say, hey, what are the top 3 most important things that you're going to be checking on? Because a lot of times we may be doing things because we think that they're important, but the people that are actually trying to hold us accountable, they might not even be thinking about those same things. And so you end up kind of working harder than you need to. And so obviously we hear the language of putting students first, and we want to be able to continue to do that, but redefining it so that it doesn't automatically mean that putting students first equals putting yourself, putting teachers last, because that is not an equation for success. Because again, if you crash and burn, who's going to be left to actually teach the students? And so again, kind of taking back that power and control, getting comfortable with the idea there's going to be maybe some things left undone, and that's okay, because if you focus on the most important things, you will have also preserved your own well-being in the process.
Yes. Okay. So much to unpack there. Ultimately, it is about us being able to do our jobs well. In order to teach well, we have to feel well. That's what I say in the Restful Teacher community. You have
Yes.
to feel well to teach well. So even on your busiest days, how can you prioritize rest, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes, right? On
Yeah.
your busiest day. So like for me, there are different, and the beauty of the 7 forms of rest is that you can pinpoint these practical things that you could just incorporate at any point in your day, whether it's just putting on your headphones and listening to some calming music, or I love to listen to my gospel to get my mind right.
Yep.
Okay. I love to just sit in silence for about 5 minutes, close my eyes, and do the 4-7-8 breathing technique.
Good.
Right.
Wow.
And so those things only take a few minutes out of your busy day, but it can help you to like refocus. It can help you to just develop a habit that's going to help you in the long run. So, what are some practical ways, some practical tips or strategies that you would recommend for someone who is just starting to prioritize and
Mm.
want to develop a habit of rest?
Yes. And as you said, even on your busiest days, and that is probably when you need those practices the most, when you're kind of burning the candle on both ends. And so I think you touched on a couple of points. This whole idea of it can be in small increments. It's kind of what I call micro moments. the other misconception is that we have to block out like huge chunks of time to just be still. And if you have that, great. But the majority of us don't have that luxury in terms of having access to huge blocks of uninterrupted time daily or weekly. And so what I like to highlight is being able to use the power of transitions. So whenever there's kind of a natural transitional part of your day, use it as an opportunity to incorporate mindfulness. And I like to engage my senses. So some of the things that you've touched on, it's like, okay, breathing, listening to music, maybe incorporate some smells, some essential oils. And so it's also about kind of cultivating your environment to help with those things. I have plenty of clients, they have like the plug-in of essential oils in their car. They use that transition in terms of their commute to kind of ground themselves and be mindful. Of course, music is available to you while you're in the car, even maybe during your planning period, as you said, putting in those, earbuds and just having a quiet moment to yourself. Also, I think too, this idea of like touch. So if you, even during the day, if you have access to just kind of plant your feet, kind of your bare feet or without shoes, kind of firmly into the ground. If you have like a plush, soft carpet underneath you, kind of a throw blanket that you can wrap yourself around just even momentarily. If you're at home, having like a weighted blanket also helps. Those things that, again, tap into your senses and can really ground you in those moments. It's not just the kind of one-off thing that you do here or there. It's really the collective things that you make a consistent habit of. And so those small kind of micro moments, those small pockets of time really add up to a transformational change, because it's all about communicating signals of calm and safety to the brain. So like the diaphragmatic breathing, which is the 4-7-8 technique that you mentioned, really focusing on the exhale, because again, that communicates, despite the chaos going on around me, I am still, I'm safe in this moment. And so again, even if you're able to incorporating, students into these kind of transitional activities, when you come in from lunch or recess, kind of depending on your grade level, okay, let's have a chance to just collectively breathe for a minute. Allow yourself, your nervous system, a chance to kind of mirror and match what's happening in the room. Allow the students, more importantly, to mirror and match how you're feeling. And so we know that the teacher sets the tone for what goes on in the classroom, and that includes our emotions and how safe and comfortable we feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought in the students, because these are things that we can expose the students to. That's part of the Restful Teacher framework. How can we also help the students to see the different forms of rest and practice them at a young age, so that they don't get to age 40 and are just now learning to prioritize rest themselves? Like,
And
hello.
the key word, practice. Practice is not something that you should only do when you're like in crisis. It's the
Right.
same reason why in schools, we have fire drills even when there's no real fire, because when you actually need to know what to do, that's not the time to just begin learning. And so again, it's the same concept. Even when I think everything is okay, that's actually when you need to kind of do that deep dive and figure out what works, what doesn't, because if you do find yourself in survival mode, you can kind of recall that muscle memory and say, you know what, I feel safe and calm when I do these things. And I know these things can be readily available to me. And so it's not the very first time that you're experiencing those things.
Yeah, and so the safety and the calmness that's something you could create in your classroom as well as in your home. And think of the things that bring you joy, like music. Certain type of music brings me joy, right? I also love the nature and outdoors, and so taking breaks during lunch to actually go outside and look at the trees. So find the things that bring you joy and incorporate those into the ways that you rest. I love to write. Um, I love affirmations and inspirational quotes. So I kind of surround my environment with those kinds of things as well. The scents, I love mint. So I drink mint tea, right? And
Yeah.
so find those things that bring you joy, and find where you can plug those in throughout those transition periods of your day. And you can cultivate your joy through rest in that way, right?
Yes. Yes. And I love that you talk about joy versus just happiness, because joy generally is cultivated from within. It's not dependent on anything external, like kind of happiness is. So I love that you're actually using the word joy to describe that.
Thank you for that confirmation and just that clarification on what joy versus happiness is, because I think it's important that we understand ourselves,
True.
because when we understand ourselves, we understand what brings us joy, but then we also understand what we need to make ourselves feel better, right?
Yes.
So that's super important. And now we are coming to a close. Is there anything else you'd like to share about how you plan on cultivating joy through your rest, and any final advice that you want to share with teachers to inspire them to take action?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's helpful if you look at it as like a lifestyle, because to me, again, we talked about it being a non-negotiable. It's just something that, and I try to do it from a place of like my values. So I kind of sit down, what's most important to me in my life? Where do I spend a lot of my time? What am I doing? Where am I physically when I'm experiencing a sense of joy? And how can I bring more of those elements into my day to day? So I kind of start there. So obviously, from a more practical standpoint, we have the things that we are kind of obligated to do that we can kind of schedule. But I think a close second needs to be like not leaving it up to chance. Things that can cultivate joy, if it helps for you to actually plan those things out, to schedule kind of your time first, and then everything else can kind of fall in and kind of get squeezed in after that point. So centering your joy, being intentional about where's the time for you in all of this, and not from a selfish place, but you have to center yourself in order to enhance the other relationships that you find important with your life. So if you want to be a better educator, a better wife, a better mother, it's like, how well are you treating yourself in comparison to all of those things first? Because if you don't view it from that perspective, it can easily bring about feelings of like resentment, or again, you become kind of jaded and bitter in terms of almost kind of from a place of jealousy. But I'm like, guess what? You don't have to be jealous about how other people get to spend their time, because you have the power to make changes in your own schedule too. So again, don't view it as a privilege or luxury, view it as a natural part of your lifestyle and center that first. Everything else can find time in between.
So with that, thank you for joining the Restful Teacher Challenge. And we encourage you to incorporate rest in your lifestyle, in your daily routine, in your transitions throughout the day. So share with us and let us know how you plan to cultivate joy through rest, and let us know how you're doing. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Thank you so much for participating in the Restful Teacher Challenge. I hope you found our guest speakers' insights inspiring and practical. Take the time to plan and implement your joyful rest daily, and tell us about it in the community.